Okay, so here's the vibe for this series. We're not doing a Prove God series. We're not doing a Christianity is true, atheism is cringe series. We're not doing a Bible facts and logic series. And we're definitely not doing a Let's Reenact 2012 Reddit series. I love you all, but I'm honestly not strong enough for that. And anyways, what we are doing is something... What we are doing is something I think way more urgent. What we are doing is something I think way more urgent and honestly way more interesting. We're talking about how certain kinds of moral language, especially Christian coded moral language, function like a coordination technology in society, and what happens when you try to redeploy that technology inside an attentions economy that rewards conflict, boundary policing, and tribal escalation. That's the thesis. That's this whole project. So now, why start here? Well, we've actually been here before. Back in 2018, there was this cultural moment. Some of you may remember it vividly when the internet was obsessed with this question that felt existential. Like it wasn't just a debate question. It felt like the ground under the conversation was moving. And it was the whole Jordan Peterson versus Sam Harris conversations. And I'm not bringing them up for fan service. I'm bringing them up because the sets of debates was basically a public demonstration of two incompatible definitions of truth. Not truth like, did you tell the truth about what happened last night? But truth like, what counts as truth at the level of civilization? What counts as true enough to build a life on? And what counts as true enough to build society on? Peterson walks into the conversation with what I'm going to call an anthropological definition of truth. He's basically saying the deepest form of truth is not some sterile correspondence with reality thing that lives in a lab notebook. Science, materialism. The deepest truth is what has been carved into us through time, through survival, through evolution, through culture. Truth is what makes us humans stable enough to not destroy themselves. Truth is what helps you coordinate, what helps you orient, what helps you endure suffering without turning into an animal. It's truth as that which works, but not in a shallow way, in a civilization as an operating system, or in it is an operating system sort of way. Harris comes in with the opposite energy. Harris is like, that is not what truth means. That might be useful, adaptive fictions, psychological benefits, cultural myths, but truth is about what is actually the case. There's a nature of reality that is deeper than what helps humans survive. And if we collapse truth into a single whatever works, we are basically leaving the door open for any story to become true so long as it stabilizes people. And you can see where the slippery slope is here. And so here's where it gets spicy. Harris can't stand Peterson's language games, and Peterson thinks Harris is missing what humans are. So they keep circling this issue. Peterson is saying it's complicated. Harris is saying, no, it's not that complicated. You're making it complicated. Why are you making it complicated? And at the center of this entire thing is Christianity. Harris is like, either the Bible is making truth claims about reality or it isn't. Either you believe the resurrection happened or you don't. Either you believe in the revelatory nature of Scripture or you don't. And Peterson famously cannot or will not or does not answer that in the way that Harris wants. He can't say whether he believes in God or not outright. He says he acts as if he believes in God. All right, this is the same dude that says no atheist is really an atheist. They're just a closeted Christian who won't admit they are a Christian, and or confidently say he acts as if he believes in God while not affirming his actual belief. Because Peterson is treating Christianity as a mythic technology, a container, an operating system that shaped the West, and he's treating that as meaningful even if you don't cash it out as literal metaphysics, Harris's deeper concern wasn't just religion bad, it was, do you realize what your ambiguity does out there in the wild? Because when you speak in this mythic, symbolic, civilizational register, when you keep saying Christianity is true, but won't define truth as correspondence, then Christian becomes floating signifier. It becomes identity language. And once Christianity becomes identity language, it stops being accountable to doctrine or ethics or literal truth claims. It becomes a banner that anyone can wave for whatever they want. And here's the part I want to underline, because it's not theoretical anymore. Christian coded moral language has a habit of slipping into demonic, satanic, evil framing, a, not as poetry, but as a literal category of persons. And you can see this in the influencer ecosystem. Someone like Candace Owens will title a video with language like "ball so hard" and then casually talk about people as satanic, demonic, evil. This isn't just commentary anymore. It's dehumanizing rhetoric using biblical coded language. The point isn't her specifically. She's just the cleanest archetype. She makes her audience part of the cosmic plot, and that makes the narrative feel immediately participatory and more real than what most pastors can do from the pulpit. And you can see it in smaller formats too. Those Jubilee style debates where you'll have, say, New Age people across from Christians, and the Christians can't help but default to that's demonic, you're doing satanic work, you're living in sin, we're trying to save you. It's not a random personality quirk. That is a built-in rhetorical affordance of revelatory frameworks. If you believe you are anchored to divine truth, then disagreement easily becomes spiritual pathology. The other person isn't wrong, they're corrupted, they're not mistaken, they're in rebellion. And that rhetorical move, whatever the speaker intends, has an obvious political and social failure mode. That's exactly the danger Harris was warning about, and it's exactly the danger I'm warning about now, except we have case studies and we have the platform dynamics that amplify the worst versions. Okay, that was 2018. Now here's what's different in 2026. Back then, it felt like a debate about metaphysics and psychology. Is religion true, useful, harmful, symbolic, literal? But now we're debating religion inside a media environment that acts like a selection machine. And selection machines don't care about what you intended, they care about what propagates. So here is the update. Even if Peterson is right, that religion can stabilize, and even if Harris is right, that truth is not the same thing as utility, there's a new variable that changes everything. The algorithm, the attention economy, the engagement incentives. That is not neutral. So now the question is not merely can Christianity function as a moral container? The question is what happens when you try to redeploy Christian-coded moral language at scale in environments that reward conflict, boundary enforcement, and enemy making because you're trying to do moral triage. If you're saying society is fragmenting, we need fast tools, Christianity has language, ritual, community stack. Okay, I understand the move. I even respect the seriousness of it, but you don't get to pretend it's a neutral one. And you don't get to pretend you can control which version of Christianity becomes dominant once it enters the public feed. Online, there is a structural advantage for the loud, identity-fused, boundary policing version of Christianity. The version that makes enemies, the version that turns politics into spiritual warfare, the version that offers certainty theater, the version that recruits. And yes, the scary thought is that a high-performing online evangelist or televangelist like Candace Owens would probably be even more effective inside a traditional parish than they are on YouTube. When the medium of the institution and the medium of the algorithm stacks, they create a gravity well that pulls towards escalation rather than any Sermon on the Mount, turn the other cheek type stuff. This is why I keep saying I'm not anti-Christian. I'm anti-stupid. Just kidding. So before we go further, I need to place myself on the map because this conversation has a way of forcing people in teams, and I'm not interested in being misread. So I'm not a Christian. I grew up with two very reformed, culturally Catholic parents from developing Latin American countries, so my upbringing was basically secular, Catholic aesthetics around the house, a communal sensibility in the background, but not evangelical, rugged individualism, and not a lived identity of Christian metaphysics. I don't identify as Christian, and I'm not here to cosplay belief for the sake of vibes. But because of the nature of this conversation, it can feel like you're being forced into a side. And if I'm forced to choose a side, I am always going to choose the nuns, the seculars, the atheists, I guess, the plural side, not as a brand, but as a sensibility. I'm more aligned with self-initiation, people following their inner light, building meaning through practice and doing it in the service of the whole without needing a single identity canopy to coordinate the group. That's also why I'm skeptical of religious revival projects that pivot away from metaphysics and try to justify themselves purely on social utility, because once metaphysical arguments go out the window, it gets really hard to explain why people should cling to scripture rather than as literature, basically as revelatory or as something you would discuss in literature circles. And you can see this dynamic clearly in other traditions too. Ex-Muslim thinkers have been saying this, some version of this for years. Belief and culture are tightly intertwined, and for many people it is all or nothing. If you don't believe the text is divine and true, why would you live under it? That's not a cheap shot. That's just a sober observation about how scripture-based systems function. Yes, I'm not anti-Christian in the sense of hating Christians, but I am generally anti-religions as a governance technology, and my flag is planted on rhetoric and values and mechanics, not metaphysics. That's what this series is. But I don't think it's ethical to go on without acknowledging the capture surface. And if you are redeploying something loaded like Christianity, I would say I'm anti-redeploying a historically loaded coordination technology in a high distortion media ecosystem without a clear design brief for how you prevent it from turning into a weapon, i.e. being weaponized. Because what I'm noticing, and what this whole series is about, is that a lot of the current return to Christianity discourse is not actually about metaphysics anymore. It's about social utility. It's about coordination and about meaning. But if you're going to make that move, you have to talk about the failure modes openly, out in the open. You have to talk about weaponization of this ideology, of this movement, or how it can be weaponized. And you have to talk about the seam between IRL formation and online recruiting, because those are two different technologies. IRL formation relies on embodied accountability and neighborliness. Online identity discourse optimized for badges, boundaries, and exile. When those two layers couple, you get an incoherence problem. People experience the Sermon on the Mount energy in person, and then get pulled onto an online Christian ecosystem running the us versus them script, and the nervous system cannot live inside of that contradiction forever. And so it resolves, usually by exit. People abandon the IRL container as soft, or abandon the online layer as poison, or split into public piety and private outrage. None of those outcomes scale the pro-social formation we claim we want. And finally, the nuns. The unaffiliated, the practice first, the I'm not interested in your banner, but I will absolutely do the work. They're not a rounding error. They are not a temporary phase. They are not future converts. They are a major formation with valid reasons to recoil from Christianity forward projects that have nothing to do with being angry atheists. Some have deep harm. Some are philosophically dissenting. Some are from other religious lineages. Many simply refuse the revelatory metaphysics and don't want to pretend otherwise, even if they like the scripture. So if a moral triage project implicitly recenters Christian language as the default civic interface, we risk selecting out exactly the coalition needed for a durable pluralistic commons. That's not an insult, it's a systems constraint. So this is episode 0 of the series. It's more of a soft launch, an intro to what is to come. The series is a map of the shift from metaphysical debate to mechanistic reality. We're going to trace how truth became utility, how utility became coordination, how coordination became identity, and how identity inside an engagement machine becomes warfare. Then we ask, the only question that matters after all that, if we can rely on a single sacred canopy, if we can't pretend Christianity is neutral, if we acknowledge the capture surface, what does a pluralistic practice-first anti-capture coordination layer actually look like? Because if we can answer that, we're not just debating what is going on online, but we can actually design a way out. And real quick, the immediate catalyst for this series is the homegrown humans community, specifically a really thoughtful exchange around a moral triage proposal and the question of whether Christian moral language can be redeployed as a stabilizing tool. I'll link the relevant essay in the thread in the descriptions because I'm not trying to shadow box. I'm responding to serious people making serious arguments. I'm not here to dunk on the enterprise. I'm here to say, if we're going to do this, we have to talk about the cost, the seams, the incentives, and the predictable failure modes, especially for the nuns, because the downsides are not hypothetical. So that's it for today, folks.